You assume your cat hates visitors because they're scared, but hiding is actually a sign of something much smarter than fear. The doorbell rings, and before the first chime even finishes, you watch it happen. A streak of fur, a flash of tail, and your cat is gone. Under the bed, behind the couch, into the back of the closet, behind the winter coats nobody's worn since March. You open the door, greet your guests, and somewhere in the back of your mind, a small, familiar embarrassment sets in. Sorry, she's shy. She doesn't really like people. Most owners assume this means their cat is scared, anxious, maybe even a little broken, but behavioral science tells a completely different story. What your cat is doing right now is one of the most sophisticated coping strategies in the animal kingdom. A strategy so effective that veterinary researchers actually build it into hospitals and shelters on purpose. And most owners have no idea. Let's start with the fear theory, because it sounds reasonable. Your cat disappears, your cat must be afraid. Case closed. But here's the problem with that explanation. It doesn't account for what your cat does after they hide. A truly terrified animal, one in a full fear response, usually shows it everywhere. Flattened ears, dilated pupils, a tucked tail, trembling, maybe even vocalizing in distress. But peek under that bed 20 minutes into the visit, and what do you usually find? A cat lying flat, eyes half open, ears rotated forward, calmly tracking the voices in the next room. Not panicking, watching. That's not the behavior of an animal in crisis. That's the behavior of an animal gathering intelligence. So why hide at all, if they're not panicked? Why not just stay out in the open and observe from the couch? Because cats aren't wired to manage uncertainty by confronting it. They're wired to manage it by controlling it. This is where it gets really interesting, because some of the clearest evidence for this comes not from cats in homes, but from cats in shelters. Animals navigating the single most stressful transition of their lives. Researchers at Utrecht University in the Netherlands, led by veterinary ethologist Claudia Vinke, studied newly arrived shelter cats and gave half of them access to a simple cardboard hiding box. The other half got nothing. Stress levels were assessed using the non-invasive cat stress score across the first 12 days in quarantine, and what they found was striking. The cats with access to a hiding box reached a calm, steady state of stress recovery, roughly 4 to 7 days faster than the cats without one. Vinke summarized the underlying principle in a way that's become something of a guiding line in feline behavior research. Hiding is a behavioral strategy the species uses specifically to cope with environmental change and stressors. Not a sign of fear malfunctioning, but a tool working exactly as designed. Cornell University's College of Veterinary Medicine has echoed the same conclusion in its clinical guidance, noting that cats benefit greatly from the ability to hide when they're under stress. It's considered such an effective coping mechanism that veterinary behaviorists now recommend hiding spaces as standard care. Not a problem to fix, but a resource to provide. Other researchers studying shelter populations have gone even further, identifying hiding as part of a distinct, healthy behavioral cluster. Work building on shelter cat studies has grouped behaviors like hiding, freezing, and retreating from humans as one coherent coping style. Separate from, and not necessarily worse than, cats who respond to stress by staying out, alert, and watchful. They're different strategies, not different outcomes. When your cat retreats from your guests, they are performing a behavior with deep roots in feline stress physiology. Not an overreaction, but a regulation tool. They're not telling you something is wrong with them. They're telling you they know exactly how to take care of themselves. But here's where it gets even more interesting, because this isn't just behavior, it's physiology. Underneath that calm, watchful posture, your cat's hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis, the same stress hormone system that governs your own fight-or-flight response, is actively working. Veterinary stress researchers commonly measure this through cortisol, the primary stress hormone, whether through blood, saliva, or even hair samples taken over time. What the shelter studies consistently show is that the opportunity to hide measurably lowers this cortisol signature compared to cats denied any concealment at all. One of the underlying mechanisms researchers point to is that hiding behavior is negatively correlated with cortisol concentration, meaning the more a stressed cat is able to hide, the lower their physiological stress marker tends to be. Think about what that means in your living room. When your cat slips under the bed during a dinner party, they're not just emotionally retreating, they're actively downregulating their own nervous system, reducing visual input, reducing the chance of sudden movement or sound, triggering a startle response, giving their HPA axis room to settle. It's the biological equivalent of you stepping into a quiet hallway during an overwhelming party to take a breath before going back in. Nobody calls that anxious. They call it self-regulation. So when did this strategy start? The honest answer is, from the beginning. Unlike dogs, who were shaped over thousands of years specifically for cooperation, proximity, and reading human cues, cats followed a very different evolutionary path. Roughly 10,000 years ago, in the early farming villages of the Fertile Crescent, wild cats were drawn, not to humans directly, but to the rodents swarming around humanity's first grain stores. It was a self-selected arrangement. The boldest, calmest cats stuck around. The rest didn't. But boldest and calmest never meant highly social. Domestic cats descend from Felis libica, a solitary desert hunter with no pack structure, no cooperative defense system, and no built-in instinct to manage novel social situations the way a dog, descended from cooperative pack hunters, naturally does. That means your cat's entire survival toolkit was built around one core principle. When something unpredictable enters your territory, you don't confront it head-on unless you have to. You observe it from cover, gather information, and decide your next move from a position of safety. A new person walking through the front door isn't a threat in the dramatic sense, but it is, evolutionarily speaking, unprocessed data, new scent, new voice, new movement pattern. Your cat's instincts are doing exactly what kept their ancestors alive for 10,000 years. Gather information before committing to an interaction. Now here's a detail that flips the whole narrative on its head. If hiding were truly just blind fear, you'd expect cats who hide more to be the more poorly adjusted, harder to handle animals overall. But shelter behavior research doesn't support that. Guardians actually described cats with this more cautious, hide-first coping style as timid with strangers, but friendly with familiar people, not fearful or poorly socialized across the board. The hiding wasn't a global personality flaw, it was a context-specific strategy, deployed only around uncertainty, and dropped entirely around trusted people. In other words, the same cat who vanishes the second your guests arrive might be the one headbutting your hand 20 minutes later, the second the new people start to feel familiar instead of unknown. Maybe your cat isn't rejecting your guests. Maybe they're just running their risk assessment protocol on a timeline that has nothing to do with your dinner party schedule. Here's the part most owners get completely backwards. Where your cat hides actually says something meaningful about how safe they feel in your home overall. A cat with zero trust in their environment doesn't calmly retreat to a known, comfortable hiding spot. They panic indiscriminately, sometimes bolting toward exits or unfamiliar, unsafe locations. A cat who heads straight for their spot, the gap behind the bookshelf, the cave under the bed they've used 100 times, is leaning on an established, secure home base. That's not a cat who distrusts your house. That's a cat using the safety of your house exactly as intended. The home itself is functioning as the resource. You built that, whether you realized it or not, just by giving them consistent, safe places to retreat to. There's one more thing I need to tell you, and it might be the most important part of this video. If your cat has always tolerated guests reasonably well, maybe hiding briefly, then re-emerging once things settle, and that pattern suddenly changes into something more extreme, prolonged hiding, refusal to eat or use the litter box, hiding even from familiar household members, don't brush that off as just being a cat. A sudden escalation in avoidance behavior can signal something deeper, a change in the environment you haven't fully registered, a new pet, a recent move, a shift in household routine. Underlying physical pain, cats are exceptionally skilled at masking illness, and increased hiding is frequently one of the earliest, most subtle warning signs, often appearing well before any limping, vocalizing, or obvious physical symptom. Or, in older cats, the early stages of feline cognitive dysfunction, where increased withdrawal and disorientation in once familiar situations can be one of the first noticeable changes. Your cat doesn't have language. Behavior is the only vocabulary they have. When a long-standing pattern breaks, it's always worth a conversation with your vet. So the next time the doorbell rings, and you watch that streak of fur disappear under the bed before your guests even step through the door, remember what's actually happening. 10,000 years of solitary hunter instinct. A coping strategy so well documented that veterinary hospitals build it into emergency care. A nervous system quietly, deliberately choosing regulation over confrontation. Your cat isn't rejecting your home, or your guests, or you. They're using the safety you've already given them exactly the way it was designed to be used, as a place to retreat, assess, and decide, on their own terms, when the moment is right to come back out. That's not fear, that's trust, working exactly as it should. If this changed how you see your cat, hit subscribe. There's a lot more of this kind of science coming. Drop a comment and tell me, where's your cat's go-to hiding spot? And if you've ever wondered why your cat suddenly turns and bites you mid-pet, with seemingly zero warning, that's the next video. And the science behind it is even stranger than you'd expect.